than your currency. Splurging millions, buying houses like Monopoly. Fucking 9 to 5, man, the money is a joke to me. Buying cryptocurrency, my money in the privacy. I make it rain down.
Hey guys and girls, welcome to this week's episode of the Binvested Birchy podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Birch, and this is a show unraveling the truth to the facade of the 21st century. We're now exiting the matrix and waking up to motherfucking reality. And waking up to reality, it is a harsh reality for a lot of people. We're living in a world of high inflation. Everything keeps rising, no matter if it's your food, your groceries, your household appliances, your living expenses, whatever the case may be, the cost is rising for everything out there. And a lot of people out there think you need to spend $1 million to go buy a property today. A lot of people think that you can't go buy the cheapest or yesteryear, etc. And today I want to do something a little bit different and work through what can you buy for your money. So I quite often see these people post around, something from the 1970s where you could buy a house for $20,000, or you could buy, something at the shopping centre for $5 or $2 that's worth now $100. It's gone up a lot. But when it comes to property, there's still an opportunity out there, even in 2022, and I'm sure it'll still extend into 2030 and on beyond that you can still pick up properties that are cheaper than what they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and so on and so forth. So if you think about it, what can you buy for $100,000? $100,000 would be the stamp duty on a $2 million property. $100,000 would get you a car, like a medium sort of entry price car, would get you a ute, like a Ford Ute or a Hilux, top end Hilux, Toyota Hilux. So $100,000 doesn't go too far nowadays. Like back 20 years ago, 30 years ago, $100,000 would have got you a whole lot more than what it does today. However, when it comes to property, there is still deals out there for $100,000. So what have I bought this year for myself or for my investors for $100,000? This year, I've bought probably at least 15 motels where each room is less than $100,000. I've bought individual properties for my investors for $100,000. I just did a bulk deal in Western Australia, which was $100,000 each, and we bought 10 units for $100,000 each. They rent for $250 a week. And other sales in the block and in the area around the 150, 200K mark. $100,000 can get you into Brisbane. We just did a deal for $120,000. You get 2 units attached, rent for $240 each, so $480 a week for $125,000 that was actually. $100,000 will get you a property in pretty much any state in the country. You can still buy that. So when people think they can buy a car or you can buy a property, you can still buy properties for that. $100,000, if you had cash, that would be a 20% deposit on a $500,000 property or a 10% deposit on a $1 million property. You could buy the whole property cash outright with that. If someone had $20,000 saved up, that's a 20% deposit for a $100,000 property. So a lot of people sit there and think, you need to have $200,000 to buy a property as a deposit to get your foot in the door, whatever. But if you had $20,000, you can still get into a property for that in 2022. If you look at $150,000, what does that buy you? I'm buying properties in capital cities for $150K, whether that be in Brisbane, whether it be in large regional suburbs throughout the country, buying stuff in Perth still, buying stuff in Adelaide still, at these sort of prices. So you can still, in capital cities, buy properties for $150K thereabouts. And when I'm looking at stuff for $150K, I'd expect to get around the $250 per week rental return. So it'd be like an 8% yield thereabouts, between $250 and $300 per week. So $150K, most people would be looking like they could buy a BMW or a Mercedes, or a stamp duty on a $2.5 million property in their capital city. It might be a 20% deposit for a $750,000 property, or you could buy a whole property for $150,000. If you needed a deposit and you got a loan, that means that you'd buy a property for $150K, put down a 20% deposit, which is $30,000. You get a loan at $120,000 for that. $120,000 loan at, say, 4% interest rate would be $4,800, or about $90 per week in interest rates. And as a rent, you'd probably get $250, $300 a week. So definitely still possible to buy those things out there. 200 grand, what do you buy for 200 grand? 200 grand is a stamp duty bill for the house that I just bought, $4 million property. 200 grand would be a 20% deposit of $1 million purchase. That'll get you maybe a unit in Sydney or Melbourne or something on the Gold Coast as a 20% deposit. It would be probably a nice car that you'd get for that. 200 grand is a decent amount, but you can still buy property. So where would I be buying something for 200 grand? There's areas in and around New South Wales that you get for 200 grand. There's areas in basically every single state in the country at that. You could buy maybe a house somewhere. I just did a house, 2 houses today in New South Wales for someone at a little over $200,000 a piece. And for 200 grand, I'd want to see $300, $350 a week rental return. Deals are definitely still out there. If you were to buy a property for 200 grand and you would get a loan for that, you'd get a 160k loan being 80% and a $40,000 deposit being a 20% deposit. So if you had 40 grand, you could get into that. If I was to go up to 250 or 300 grand, I'd want stuff more substantial for that. 300 grand, I'd want it to be in Sydney. I'd want it to be a duplex pair. I buy a duplex pairs like both sides of the duplex for 300, 350, 400, depending where they are nationally, whether it be in Perth, whether it be in Queensland somewhere, whether it be somewhere in New South Wales. 300,000, 350,000, that sort of price range. I'll be wanting something more substantial, but definitely still out there. People go, I want to buy a house in Western Sydney, right? If you're going to buy a fibro house in Western Sydney, I used to buy the shit out in Western Sydney for 80 grand a piece, for 200 grand a piece. And yes, you can't go buy those things again, but you can still go and buy 200 grand properties in different locations around the country. And that's still what I do to this day. Last year, I bought a unit in Sydney for $250,000 in Sydney, in the Sydney market, right? And it was a proper 2-bedroom unit for $250K. Yes, sure, it needed some work and all that sort of stuff, but it was still in Sydney. Am I out there trying to replicate my portfolio that I built 20 years ago or 15 years ago or 10 years ago? No, I'm looking at how can I reproduce my portfolio today by keep adding to it and keep growing from that portfolio. And I do that nationally. I live in Australia. Australia is a country, a massive country. It's a big demand. And I think that given the most recent sort of spate of builders going broke and supply chain issues, they call it supply chain issues, but it's really just inflation that's creeping up. The cost to build a house has gone so high, you can't even build a house for $200,000 or $300,000. If someone wanted to build a granny flat, I have all these people all the time going, "Oh, Nathan, Birchy, I want to get a build a granny flat, right?" And it's like, how much does it cost to build a granny flat? You'd be buying a property for, say, $1 million in Western Sydney, adding 200 grand for a granny flat, so you can fill it 1.2. You've overcapitalized on the property. And then when you build that granny flat, it's going to cost you 200 grand. What are you going to do? Get an extra $300 a week? I'd rather spend 200 grand and go and buy a whole new asset that's going to bring me a new set of cash flow, and the asset will continue to go up in value. So look at where the value is to build a property. The stuff that I'm talking about here is below rebuild cost. That's where the value is. And these aren't going out to little pokey towns, right? Like we're looking at 300 grand. We're buying in like good areas in Sydney. Just the other week, I bought for someone for $315,000 in Parramatta for a 2-bedroom unit in Parramatta. So, these are good value, good location sort of properties. If you had 500 grand, people would be like, I want to buy it. You can't even buy a fibro house in a housing commission area in Western Sydney for 500 grand. You're probably looking at like 800 grand. That is not a market I wish to play in because I see better value out there around the country. If I'm spending $500,000, 500 grand, what would I be buying for 500 grand? Today, I did a block of units, 8 units for 500 grand. Rent on those units is $250 a week per property. So it's $2 grand a week, $2 grand a week in rent, 100 grand a year in cash flow, 100 grand over 500 grand is 20% yield. You can't build a unit for 500 grand for 8 units. So the value there is intrinsic. The upside is massive. The cash flow is very strong. And that thing with a loan at 100% loan with council rates and water rates and insurances and stuff like that, that property is still positive $30,000 per year. I just did another unit which had 7 units in it, 685,000, positive $40,000 a year. So literally just that one property could retire someone, but no one's talking about that stuff. They're all trying to still replicate stuff from years ago. So, you know, you can be playing in that sort of market, or you can be playing in a different market. When you buy a block of units for $500,000, you probably have to put down a 40% deposit. So going out and, you know, if you had a deposit, you could spend, if you had a 500 grand property, you have to put down a 40% deposit. That's 200 grand as a deposit. Not everyone would have 200 grand as a deposit, and it'll tie all your funds into that one property. So I look at those properties as coming after the foundation property portfolio. So all the stuff like the 100, 150, 200, 250, 300, 350K properties all form the foundation property portfolio, getting a good mixed bag of those assets. If you got 10 properties at 200 grand a piece, that's $2 million. If the properties go up by, say, 10%, that's $2 million gone up by 10%. That's 200 grand in equity that you got there. Then suddenly use the equity from those 10 foundation properties to go and buy your first unit block. So unit blocks are very important for the journey, but it's important to have the foundations first. If you go and buy the units without having the foundations, then you're in for a lot of trouble because you're adding risk to your position. So, $1 million, you'd buy, you know, a really substantial property for that. I just did one today in New South Wales, South Coast, and that property was $2,050,000, and it's got a batch of units in it. The units are worth $200,000 a piece more than what we were paying for them. So the owner that's buying them is making over $1 million just by buying the property. So a lot of people, you know, sort of think for 500 grand, they can't even buy, they might go and buy a house in Brisbane and add a granny flat to it. It's like, it's the dumbest strategy you've ever heard. You might have someone that goes and buys a house in Western Sydney and renovates and puts a granny flat on it, does something like that. Dumbest strategy I've ever seen. If I'm in that position where I'm building a portfolio, I want to accumulate a large asset base using the lowest risk possible, but with the maximum sort of outcome. And then from that, adding in these extra sort of assets in a later part of the portfolio. So for me, at the moment, like I'm buying motels, I've been talking about, still buying residential properties. I've bought in this year alone probably six or seven residential properties, just standard houses and units, individuals. And I've bought probably another 12 or 13 motels so far this year. And with those things, they are just, you know, at the other extreme of the portfolio, I've got all these foundational properties, little cheapies, and they're now supporting my growth into these type of assets. So I think it's very crucial to have a strategy, have a plan in place to be able to, work out where you are, where it is that you want to go to in the future, and working out what sort of asset you need. I know there's a lot of people out there thinking, shit, you know, like I can't buy anything, can't get ahead. You know, I've got money, it's losing its value left, right, and centre. But, you know, it's still possible in 2022 to buy a property for 100 grand. The cheapest property I bought this year was $9,000 for a block of land for someone. Blocks of land that I pick up out there in the market for $30,000, $20,000, $40,000 that have significant upside to them. Am I going out there buying the land and building? Absolutely not. But carrying a block of land for 20 grand, someone might be sitting there going, I've got 20 grand, can't get a loan, can't do shit. You go buy a block of land, that thing goes up from 20 grand to 150 grand, you sell it, you take the profit, and then you use that to go and buy something else that's going to help fulfill more of your cash flow goals to get you the lifestyle that you wish. So if you need help designing that portfolio, if you need help working out where to find those properties, that's what I specialize in every day of the week. A lot of people think, what does Nathan do, right? Does he, read conspiracy theories? Does he analyze the news? Does he just go buy properties to do this? I run a buyer's agency here at B.Invested. I buy lots and lots of properties for people. I specialize in buying good value properties below market value with strong cash flows and building strategies around getting people large property portfolios. So if you need help with that, reach out to my team, 1300 367 925. Email us at admin@binvested.com.au, and look forward to helping you kick ass with your goals. Don't forget to subscribe to YouTube, Google Play, Apple Play, and Spotify, and we'll catch up next week. See you next Tuesday. Bye for now.
Like Bilal said, man, we're stuck in the matrix. This my advice, don't care if you take it. The dollar about to die, soon to be hyperinflated. This my 2 cents, don't care if you save it. Joint be decentralized and you will see you been lied to the whole time, and it's the irony, cause they do the exact opposite. You become a slave to the system, enough your money, all they do is profit. There's no conspiracy theory, you better hear me. Crypto will set you free before the system does. I don't care if you do or you don't, but what I'm saying is the truth to the reason you choke. I never been a failure, excuse my behavior. Keep talking, haters doing me a favor. They all telling lies, I know what they been telling you. I'm the opposite of Donald Trump of Australia. It's amazing, there for the taking. My time is never wasted, just getting wasted. These girls say I'm really breathtaking. I can't help it if I really